Hi everyone, I'm Allie with PotomacBeads. Join me in making this fun Tubelet Peyote bracelet. With all of our new shapes, I like to do peyote to show the most basic stitch and the variants that you can get with the new shapes. If you need any supplies, check out the links below me in the description to purchase online with us at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. To get started, the first thing you're going to do is put on a stop bead. This is a bead that's going to come off the project and is basically going to stop your beads from falling off. I have an 11 seed bead in a silver color that I have on here, not to get it confused with the beads that I'm using. The beads that I'm using are the cylinder, that new Potomac tubelet, and I'm using it in the white blue luster. I have a 3mm Aztec gold check glass bead, an 11 Demi round in that nice Olympic bronze color, and then an 11 Miyuki seed bead, and I'm using that in the matte opaque mauve color. We're going to establish our pattern, which is going to be a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 1-drop peyote, depending on kind of what look you're going for. I'm going to make sure whatever pattern or bead I'm adding is going to be the same length approximately as the cylinder. I'm going to begin my peyote pattern with 4 of my 11 seed beads, which is going to be the first bead in my peyote. From there, I want you to add 2 of your cylinder beads. And then our 4th bead in the pattern is going to be a demi round, 3mm demi round, and let that drop down next to that stop bead. From here, we're going to reverse the thread and go back towards the stop bead in a true peyote fashion, picking up as we go towards the stop bead whatever bead we're sewing into. So in peyote, you're skipping the last bead, which is going to be that set of beads, and I'm sewing into the second one back. Next, I'm going to skip the next set of beads, and I'm sewing into and adding the same beads that I'm going into. When I'm coming out the end, near the stop bead, I'm going to look back and see what the last bead was that was on the row previous at the ending there. I know because my pattern is kind of 3, that what I need to add here is going to be my demi rounds with my 3mm. The needle now is going to come away from that stop bead, and I'm going to sew back through that grouping of 4 11-0s. I'm coming out of those 4 11-0s, and I know I need to add 4 more of the 11s. I'm going to sew into the tube there, into that tubelet, and out. Coming out the tubelet, I'm sewing back towards the stop bead, so I know I'm going to add whatever bead I'm sewing into, which is going to be 4 more 11s. This is also going to be the first line as I sew back through here that has my full range of my beads. So you can see my 4 beads in a diagonal row with that mauve color. Again, I'm sewing towards the stop bead, so I'm going to add whatever bead I'm sewing into that collection on my needle and then sew into them. Coming out the end here, I can look back and see what the next bead in my next row would be, and it's going to be my tubelet. I'm going to reverse the thread, sewing away from, and it's going to be whatever bead I'm sewing out of is the bead that I add. So I'm going to add my 11-0 grouping, or I'm sorry, my 3mm grouping, and back through there. So as you establish and create this kind of Babbling Brook line, you'll start to notice and see that nice diagonal in effect. Coming back through here, I'm adding my last bead for my row there of 4. You can see that row of 4 3mm beads. Sewing back now into my cylinder and pulling for that tubelet. Now there is a slight size differentiation, so it will have a little bit of a wave to it, which I think gives it a nice look. Coming out of the tubelet, then you can look back and see what the next one is in your pattern that you need to start adding, and that's going to be my 4 seed beads to get my next row and my next line. You're going to continue then with your pattern, making sure that you have that 1 or 3 or 4-drop peyote going on, where you're adding 1 or 3 or 4 beads at a time. As I add my last cylinder here, that is going to establish a complete diagonal line of all of my seed beads. And you can see what's going to start to happen is it's going to have a little bit of a wave kind of effect to it as your peyote continues to grow and your brook continues to kind of move along there in the peyote stitch row. So continue adding on all of your seed beads, adding in those nice diagonal lines of the 3s and the cylinders along with the 11 seed beads. So as I'm going along down the line here, it's nice to think about the fact that a lot of times when you're using bugles in something like this, you're worried about that kind of tubular shape or that cylindrical shape being something that's going to cut the thread. The nice thing is with the tubelets being the checked glass and the way that it's manufactured, I don't have to worry about that as I'm going through here, and I can have a nice tight pull and tension on my thread to get these nice kind of diagonal stitches without having to worry about pulling on the thread and having a, say, Miyuki cylinder bead or bugle bead cut the thread. The check beads that we've created, these tubelet beads, are a lot thicker, and because of the way they're manufactured, they have that rounded edge rather than a sharp edge, which is going to allow you to give a nice tighter pull and has just a little bit of a different kind of smoother feel and smoother look to it. As I go along and create the peyote, it's making me kind of appreciate them more and more as we get these nice diagonal stitches in line. One way to work with the problem of running out of thread is to tie a new piece of thread onto the old piece. The other way is to take the old piece here and sew the remainder of the thread back into the project. We're going to sew back down a couple rows of the peyote stitch, kind of turning the thread and making sure that the thread is not being exposed at all and that it's going back through our 3, our 4, or our single tubelet drop peyote. Once you have it established a little bit further back in the peyote, you're going to start with a new piece of thread. The new piece of thread, rather than starting right here at the very end, in order to trap it and catch it, we're going to start further back along the piece, about 6 or so rows back. So you'll grab your thread, establish another workable length, which for me is usually between 4 and 5 feet. Longer than that, it actually takes me longer to do the peyote stitch, and also it is more relevant or more easily tangled. I'm going to take my needle nose plier and flatten out the end of my thread, go back then into my needle, thread my needle. If I need to straighten out my needle a little bit, you can do that with your pliers. Go further down into your peyote piece and basically re-stitch through some of the rows of the peyote, leaving a little bit of a tail where you know that the end of the thread will be, and going back and kind of zigzagging along the peyote line. You want to make sure to be careful when you're doing this that you don't pull too tightly in one direction, which can actually change and kind of create a wave in the peyote. The nice thing when you're doing kind of a free form or a multi-drop peyote like this, you will not see that change in the actual kind of diagonal stitch. So you can kind of give a nice tight yank at the end of each row. And you're going to change up going down through the rows of the peyote stitch back to the end and basically just start in with the stitch again. That little tail that's there, you can kind of let stick out and continue to sew through the piece. Along the ends, you reverse it, which is going to give a little bit of a double thread look to the ends. The nice thing is I'm trying to reverse it near my green beads so that way you do not see the thread at all. Kind of stepping up on that peyote diagonal stitch then. You can see the more thread you have, and me in the bottom right hand corner here, you can see how far I need to pull my hand up to get rid of that thread. Coming back down then, I'm almost established to the start of where I was ending, and I need to be coming out down there along the bottom to go in and create my row. So I'll sew back so I can get to that position and then basically just restart in on my peyote stitch. So I need to sew, back through here to make sure my thread is coming out right at the right place. I'll skip over that thread there, reversing the thread, getting it so it's coming out through the last beads my thread was coming out of when I added beads. And now I'm ready to continue on. That is one way, again, to go through. If you are doing a piece where you have a delicate pattern that you're doing or something that is really tight fitting beads, you definitely want to use that method so you don't see any knots along the piece. Honestly, with this piece, I could have used the method that I very regularly use in all the designs that I do, where I just tie the thread on to the very end of the last piece and kind of tuck it back. I'm not going to kind of burn off the ends or anything until I am done with my strip here of this Babbling Brook Peyote piece. So as I go in here and finish up, I thought what I would do is show you how to add a double button clasp. One of the other, the Super Duo Peyote, I think it is, or Storm Duo Peyote, I went in and I showed how to add a bar clasp. So this one I figured I would go in and show how to add 2 buttons for this little bit of a wider bracelet. So what I'm gonna do is basically get my thread and needle back to the start of the project. Because of the variance of the size, you can see that I have a little bit of a differential from the start to the finish. What I'm gonna do is just kind of even that out by adding another row of my 11 O's here at the top to get it almost kind of like a nice flush flat end. I'm gonna go in then back through that second to last tubelet, not adding anything, and also through the last tubelet. Again, not adding anything. Now I want to come out between my first 2 rows of my seed beads here, and I want to come out between the first 2 rows of the tubelets. I'm going to go back into the design along the peyote stitch, almost if you were going back to kind of secure it or to end the thread. Going back up to the top here. And I'm going to give me the opportunity to come down that last row. Come out after the first 4 beads of that last row. Add 2 of your 11 0 seed beads. Go up through the back of the first button. At the top here, add an 11, 1 of your demi rounds, and 1 11 0 seed bead. Come down through the button. So that way that decorates just the outside of that button a little bit, and I'm using the Aztec gold button. 2 more seed beads go in, and then I'm going back into that same spot there, but this time through the next set of 4 beads. I'm bringing my thread and needle out. That's just basically gonna keep those seed beads right along there and have that button sit right at the end. Sewing down, then I'm gonna sew down so I'm coming out my 2 tubelets and do the exact same thing. Add in 2 seed beads, up through the back of the cup button. At the top of the cup button, I'm going to add an 11 0, 1 of my demi rounds, 1 of my 11 O's, down the cup button on the other side. There's a million different ways that you can end what you're working with, and just check out some of the other videos to show you some of the other ways to add and end the whole bracelet. Coming back then down through the tubelet, I'm going to go through the last tubelet, coming out the end. And then the last thing we're going to do is reinforce this whole entire line of the cup buttons. So I'm going to go back up and snake through just like I did at the start. Go down through the 2 out, reinforce 2 out, and then sew back down along the project to end my thread. We'll flip over to the other side then and go between those last 2 rows of my 11s and my tubelet, and between the tubelet and the 4mm round, to add 2 loops that are going to go right around my button clasps. Going down to the end of the thread then, I have my starter bead here, and I'm just going to start, like I said, a couple rows back, just like we've been doing when we add thread. Kind of off to the side there, give a little bit of a tail that I'll eventually go back and burn down. And zigzag through the peyote. Going through and making sure I have about 3 or 4 turns in there to really kind of lock it in place so that I can't actually pull the thread out. I'm not even going to worry about the tail of the peyote at the starter side, because I'm going to have the thread going basically the opposite way. The thread originally was going down towards my right hand, Now this thread's coming through on the left hand, which is going to lock that in place. So eventually we will take the stop bead off and actually burn down that thread end, but I'm not even going to worry about weaving it back in because you'll be able to secure it in this fashion, in this manner. Go ahead and get your thread, your new thread here, back to the start here. So again, we can come out between our demi round and our cylinder, as well as our cylinder and our 11O. Coming out the end here now between my two of my groupings, that 11O grouping and the tubelet, I'm going to add one of my 3mm Aztec gold rounds, and then I'm going to make my first loop. I'm going to use my opaque mauve color here of my 11Os. I use this as an opportunity to kind of clean up that bead mat, get all of those beads out of the way. If you want, you could have used your demi rounds as well to do the loop. That's kind of up to you. And I'm going to establish 2 loops, one for each one of my buttons. So I'm going to have a loop here at the top between these 2 beads, and then I'll have a loop at the bottom between the second 2 set of beads, which will allow me to have that double closure. After I have enough beads on my loop, I'm going to go back down through that 3mm bead, take my thread and needle through that first of my tubelets, take it through the second tublet, and then repeat the loop, going back and adding a 3mm, all of my 28 seed beads back through again, snake back up, and tie off my 2 loops, just like we did, adding the 2 buttons at the base and the bottom of the bracelet. As the final step, you're just going to go in and burn off all those thread ends, kind of flush towards the project, making sure when you use your thread zap or your thread burner that you are not burning through any of the threads that are connecting beads together. Again, you can see kind of where I bring the thread out and where I'm burning that thread down. The nice thing is I'm using green beads and I have green thread. You can see those 2 loops that were established, and they fit really, really nicely with those 2 buttons to have a nice kind of double closure. I love the look of 2 buttons back to back, and I think it adds a lot to the look of the design. So there you have the buttons and that nice Babbling Brook Peyote Tubelet bracelet. Thanks so much for watching this Tubelet Peyote bracelet. Hopefully this Babbling Brook bracelet gave you some ideas with kind of that free-form peyote stitch, that multiple drop version, and also a new way to do the clasp, maybe with more than 1 or 2 buttons. As always, if you need any of the materials to do this bracelet, you can go below the video to the links that we have to purchase from PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. Remember, you can also give a little thumbs up to the video, comment below to let us know your ideas, your uses, and help out the beading community to tell them different counts and patterns and all kinds of different versions that you did of the bracelet. As always, too, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel to get regular updates from us at Potomac Beads when we have new videos, new tutorials, new Better Beader episodes, as well as new spotlights on products. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and enjoy your own Babbling Brook Tubelet Peyote bracelet.